18-year-old Ethan Roland, wealthy and entitled, saunters into court like it's a party. He's facing reckless driving charges, but he's not worried. Rules are for other people, right? Wrong. Judge Porter, a man who embodies quiet authority, is about to deliver a powerful lesson. This isn't just a traffic case, it's a clash of privilege and justice, and Ethan's arrogance is about to meet its match. The courtroom was packed that morning, buzzing with quiet murmurs as people shuffled into their seats. It was a typical day at the Franklin County Courthouse, except for one detail. This hearing was expected to draw attention. Ethan Roland, a wealthy 18-year-old with a reputation for reckless behavior and an inflated sense of entitlement, was due to stand before Judge Henry Porter, known for his unshakable demeanor and sharp intellect. Judge Porter was respected throughout the legal community as a fair but no-nonsense arbiter of justice. Ethan arrived in his usual fashion, late and unapologetic. Dressed in expensive sneakers, designer jeans, and a hoodie that cost more than most people's rent, he strolled into the room as though it were a casual hangout spot. His lawyer, visibly uncomfortable, walked quickly behind him, attempting to minimize the scene. The courtroom, accustomed to decorum, fell silent as eyes shifted toward him. Ethan stopped in the middle of the aisle, seemingly oblivious to the people waiting for him to take a seat. With a dismissive wave, he motioned for his lawyer to move aside so he could set his backpack down on the bench, his entitlement radiating as he looked around, chewing gum with an air of complete indifference. Judge Porter entered moments later, the air in the room changing instantly. The murmurs died down, replaced by a respectful hush. In his mid-50s, Porter was an imposing figure with a tall frame and calm authority. His sharp eyes scanned the room briefly before settling into his chair. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Ethan hesitated, clearly irritated, before standing with a heavy sigh. His expression screamed, "Why am I even here?" Judge Porter didn't react. He adjusted his glasses, opened the file in front of him, and began the proceedings. Ethan's case was fairly straightforward. A series of traffic violations compounded by an incident of reckless driving that had endangered a cyclist. What could have been a routine hearing was about to take a dramatic turn, thanks to Ethan's arrogance. As Judge Porter started outlining the charges, Ethan's posture shifted. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and rolled his eyes, a blatant sign of disrespect that did not go unnoticed. But instead of addressing his behavior, Judge Porter carried on with calm professionalism. His tone was measured, his words deliberate. It was as though he was daring Ethan to continue his act. The tension in the room began to build, and even the most seasoned court regulars sat up a little straighter, sensing something brewing. But Ethan, oblivious to the storm he was inviting, had no intention of backing down. He shifted in his seat, his irritation becoming more pronounced with every word Judge Porter spoke. He began tapping his fingers against the wooden table, loud enough for those nearby to hear. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something urgently, but Ethan waved him off with a dismissive flick of his hand. The room, already tense, seemed to hold its breath. When Judge Porter asked him to confirm his identity, "Yeah, that's me," Ethan said, barely glancing up. His tone was laced with indifference. A collective murmur rippled through the room. Judge Porter's expression remained calm, though his eyes lingered on Ethan for a moment longer than usual. "Mr. Roland," he began, his voice steady, "in this courtroom we adhere to a certain level of decorum. I suggest you adjust your tone accordingly." Ethan smirked as though the judge's words were some sort of joke. He leaned back in his chair, twirling a strand of his messy blonde hair between his fingers. "Sure thing, Your Honor," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Gasps echoed softly through the room. The court reporter paused briefly before continuing her transcription. Even Ethan's lawyer buried his face in his hands, visibly mortified. Judge Porter, however, remained unflappable. "Mr. Roland," he said again, his voice firm but calm. "Do you understand the charges brought against you today?" Ethan rolled his eyes again, this time audibly sighing. "Honestly, no. I mean, it's just some dumb tickets and someone getting scared because I hit the gas too hard. This is a waste of time." The courtroom fell silent. All eyes were now on Judge Porter, who carefully closed the folder in front of him. He removed his glasses, placing them deliberately on the bench. For a moment, it seemed as though time itself had paused. "Mr. Roland," he said slowly, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight, "I would advise you to choose your words carefully from this point forward." The gravity of his tone caused even the most disinterested court spectator to sit up, but Ethan, still oblivious to the seriousness of the situation, simply shrugged. "What? It's true," he said, leaning forward this time. "It's not like I hurt anyone. This whole thing is ridiculous." But what Ethan failed to realize was that his words were no longer falling on deaf ears. Judge Porter's silence spoke volumes, and the courtroom was about to witness a response they would never forget. Judge Porter leaned back in his chair, his piercing gaze fixed on Ethan. The room remained silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Even Ethan's lawyer, who had been shuffling papers nervously, stopped to glance at the judge. "You believe this is ridiculous, Mr. Roland?" Judge Porter asked, his tone steady, almost conversational. He didn't raise his voice, but the authority in it was impossible to ignore. Ethan scoffed. "Yeah, I do. I mean, come on, it's not like I robbed a bank or something. This is just overkill." He waved his hand dismissively, as though brushing away an imaginary nuisance. Judge Porter nodded slowly, folding his hands on the bench. "I see," he said. His calm demeanor only heightened the suspense, making the spectators edge closer to the edge of their seats. "Let me clarify something for you, Mr. Roland. The charges against you include not only reckless driving, but also endangering a cyclist's life. The law does not measure accountability by the size of the crime, but by its impact. Do you understand that?" Ethan rolled his eyes yet again, muttering under his breath, Sure, whatever you say." The whisper was soft, but it carried in the silence of the courtroom. The judge's face remained composed, but there was a shift, a slight narrowing of his eyes, a pause that signaled something was about to change. "Mr. Roland," Judge Porter began, his voice still calm, "do you recall the incident from 2 weeks ago? The one that brought you here today?" Ethan shrugged, looking bored. "Some guy on a bike swerved. I honked. He moved. End of story." The judge raised his eyebrows. "End of story, you say?" "Yeah," he said, crossing his arms. "No harm, no foul." But Judge Porter wasn't finished. He reached for a document on the bench, flipping through it with measured precision. Then he addressed the courtroom. "Let the record show," he said, his voice carrying authority, "that the cyclist in question, Mr. Diego Alvarez, is a 45-year-old father of 2. He was riding in the designated bike lane when Mr. Roland accelerated toward him, causing him to swerve and crash. Mr. Alvarez sustained injuries to his shoulder and required medical attention. He has since been unable to work as a delivery driver." Ethan's smirk faltered for the first time. He glanced at his lawyer, who whispered something to him, but Ethan waved him off again. "I didn't hit him," he muttered. "He's fine." Judge Porter continued, now directing his full attention back to Ethan. "Does this sound like no harm, no foul to you?" Before Ethan could reply, Judge Porter's next move made it abundantly clear that his actions had far-reaching consequences. Judge Porter leaned forward slightly, his presence commanding the room. "Mr. Roland, your perspective on this matter is troubling, not because of the charges themselves, but because of your refusal to acknowledge the weight of your actions." Ethan leaned back in his chair, feigning nonchalance, though the growing tension in the room was impossible to miss. "Look, I said I didn't hit him. People are so dramatic these days." That comment elicited a few gasps from the courtroom gallery. Judge Porter tapped his pen lightly against the desk, pausing for a moment before speaking again. "Dramatic," he repeated, his tone still even. "Would you like to hear from Mr. Alvarez himself, Mr. Roland? Because he's here today, in this courtroom." The air grew thick with anticipation. Ethan's confidence wavered. His eyes darted briefly toward the gallery. A man in the second row, Mr. Alvarez, sat quietly, his arm in a sling. His weathered face showed no anger, only a kind of quiet disappointment that seemed to cut deeper than any harsh words could. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but his defiance wasn't entirely gone. "I'm sure he's fine," he muttered, though his voice lacked its earlier bravado. Judge Porter leaned back again. "Mr. Roland, your dismissal of this man's pain speaks volumes about your character. But this isn't just about him. It's about the precedent we set when individuals of privilege believe they are above accountability." The courtroom was so silent that even the faint scratch of the court reporter's pen could be heard. All eyes were on Judge Porter now, waiting to see him. Thank you so much for watching and supporting Story Karma. Your engagement, whether it's watching, liking, commenting, or sharing, helps us continue bringing you powerful stories of crime, justice, and karma. We truly appreciate each and every one of you for being part of this journey. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Your support keeps this channel going, and we can't wait to share more incredible stories with you.